And let's get to it. So before we start, I'm just going to introduce today's moderator. Carina Gonzalez is a senior adult services librarian with Piscataway Public Library. Her passion in librarianship includes social justice, access, and intellectual freedom. She began her career as an elementary library media specialist, followed by being a high school library media specialist, and then went on to become an outreach academic librarian before finally finding her home in public librarianship. Carina is an accomplished writer, professional web designer, and entrepreneur, and you can learn more about her on librariancarina.com, and we are thrilled to have her here with us today. I will be monitoring the chat on Carina's behalf as she shows off her beautiful slides. So drop anything in the chat that you might need, and I will make sure that it gets out there, but also feel free to unmute and ask questions and share your thoughts and ideas as we go along. And I will let Carina take it away.
Thank you, Darby. So hello and welcome to She Said, He Said, They Said, an introduction to gender and sexuality in libraries. So as Darby said, this is me, Carina Gonzalez. I work at the Piscataway Public Library as a senior adult services librarian. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I'm a member of the LGBTQIA community. I was also a gender studies minor in college, and both my undergraduate and graduate theses were on the topics of gender. I'm very passionate about this topic. Here's my contact information, both professional and personal, as well as my website if you want to learn more about me. This presentation in its entirety will be available to you, so no need to frantically take notes. So here are objectives for today. First, we're going to start with some definitions. The difference between sex and gender, focusing on those two terms specifically. What gender identity is, the whole trans umbrella, some facts on homophobia and heterosexism, the intersectionality of all of this, and then a deeper dive into what libraries have to do with all of this. At the end, I have compiled some resources for you to peruse at your leisure. And if you have questions, please pop them in the chat. Like Darby said, she'll just give a yell and ask them live, or we can wait until the end, whichever you prefer. So let's start with some definitions. I'm going to be using a lot of terms that may be new to you. So I'm going to go through some of them up front. For those of you who already know these terms, just smile and nod. There will be other terms that I go into greater detail, but let's start with the basics. So let's talk about sex. Sex is your biological assignation of female or male. Gender attribution is the gender that other people have assigned to you. Gender identity is how you see your own gender. Cisgender describes a person whose gender identity is the same as their sex assigned at birth. Cishet, which is short for cis heterosexual, is someone whose gender identity matches their gender attribution and who are only attracted to the opposite sex. In other words, straight people. Those are your cishets. Your gender expression is how you choose to show other people your gender. Gender fluid means you see gender as a spectrum, which it is, and you express all the colors of that rainbow. Non-binary means you don't describe to the notion that there are only two genders. And gender queer means you dabble in all of the genders. A lot of these definitions sound similar, and they are, but the slight differences are empowering to the people who use these terms to describe themselves. It lets them and us decide how we want to be addressed and seen, which is something to be respected. In short, it's always the person's call, what they want to be called, and they have the right to change what they want to be called in the future. So now let's talk about the letters, the alphabet soup of gender and sexuality. When there is discussion about people who are not straight or who have alternative genders, they are all lumped together in what is known as LGBT or LGBTQ or LGBTQIA+. More letters keep getting added on. This is because the groups of people this abbreviation stands for are actually very different from each other with their own cultures and histories. So it's important to break it down and talk about them individually for a moment. So we have our L, which stands for lesbian, which is a woman who's attracted to another woman. Notice I didn't necessarily say sexually attracted to. It could be romantically, physically, mentally, etc. The G is for gay, which is when a man is attracted to a man. The B is for bisexual, which is someone who's attracted.
Oh, sorry. Thank you. Oh, okay.
The B is for bisexual, which is someone who's attracted to both men and women. However, that term has become problematic because it assumes that there are only two genders. More often, people who have been classified as bi will instead consider themselves pan or omnisexual, instead to acknowledge the great variety in gender expression that we actually have. Then we come to the T, but we'll come back to that one because that one deserves its own spotlight. So let's move to the Q. Q stands for two different terms, questioning or queer. Someone who is questioning has maybe felt an attraction they couldn't explain or are exploring what that means to them. Someone who identifies as queer doesn't quite fit into any of the other groups or fits into most of them because queer has become a reclaimed term, meaning it was originally used as a slur, but has been transformed into an empowering title within the LGBT community. The I stands for intersex, which are people born with natural body variations in sex chromosomes, hormones, genitals, reproductive systems, not to be confused with hermaphrodites, which have the sexual organs of both males and females. And then we have the A for asexual, which are people who do not feel sexual attraction for other people. The plus sign acknowledges that there are many more terms that are excluded from this list, like sapiosexuals, people attracted to minds, demisexuals, people who only experience sexual attraction if feelings happen first. And there are many more. Basically, all of these people are just not straight. They're just not cishet. They are not cisgender. That's all they have in common. But they've been gathered in this catch-all other community. And the reason why I'm making such an emphasis on this is because a lot of people think that the LGBT community is automatically this family, and that's not true. It's a term that was sort of made by cishet people because they're all part of this other group, and they're actually really, really different. So let's go back to the letter T.
Oh, and Carina, I just wanted to point out, Jenna said in the chat that she's seeing bisexuality redefined as attraction to genders like their own and genders not like their own, I guess, to sort of address that idea of more than one gender, which, thank you, Jenna, for pointing that out. I hadn't heard that before.
Love that other way of making it still binary. So liking your own and others. I like that. I'm embracing that. Thank you. Okay, so now we're going to go into the T. So the reason why I'm speaking about the T last is because it has little to do with sexuality, unlike most of the other letters. T stands for trans, which is an umbrella term that encompasses a lot. I'm going to go even more into detail into trans later, but the most important takeaway is that being trans has to do with how you see yourself, not who you are attracted to. I know this is a lot of information, especially if this is new for you. There's a reason this is a field of study unto itself. I included this picture of Jonathan Van Ness's book, Over the Top, because JVN is a good example of someone who is gender non-conforming and is out and public about it. Jonathan is one of the stars of Queer Eye, which I highly recommend, and the brand new TV show Getting Curious with Jonathan Van Ness, which comes out on Netflix in 3 days. His pronouns are he, she, they, meaning she's comfortable with all of them. JVN wears dresses and nail polish, has a full beard, and considers themselves gay because she's attracted to men and is married to a man. Jonathan does not consider themselves transgender and feels no need to change their name. This is Jonathan's current truth, but it can change. In 2019, his preferred pronouns were he, him, his. and this has changed. So we are allowed to grow and change and define ourselves as we will. All right. Let's dig a little deeper into the difference between sex and gender.
Okay, bye-bye.
So here's a helpful graphic I found via the Lancet Medical Journal. In the center of the graphic, we have sex, which is biological, chromosomes, reproductive organs, genitalia, hormones, etc. Your sex is frankly what's in your pants and is none of anybody's business unless you want it to be. Then we have the female gender, which is a culturally derived term. In our culture, the American culture, femininity is associated with caring and service jobs like librarianship. Women are considered to be fragile and more emotional. They also receive inferior health care and tend to be more financially dependent. While men are culturally defined by words like construction and defense, they're considered to be aggressive risk takers. We probably all know men who don't fit these descriptions, but men are still paid more, participate in our workforce more, and achieve financial autonomy easier. When you lay it all out in an infographic like this, the inequities are obvious. And we like to think we've evolved beyond this thinking, but as a collective, we haven't. Men are still lauded for taking care of their own children, and women are still expected to do most of the housework, even if they work full-time outside of the home. This is an unfortunate reality of our culture, and treating these concepts as sacred is why we have to have this conversation in the first place. If you were raised to believe that only women should wear dresses and men should wear ties, whenever you see a person who breaks these rules, there is going to be a culture shock moment, and that's natural. It's what actions you do next after you have these feelings that's important. So we have discussed that gender is a social construct that a culture associates with a person's perceived biological sex. You see a person with long pink nails and makeup and assume this person is female. However, the way someone expresses themselves through clothing, voice intonation, or behavior may or may not have anything to do with what their biological sex is. We are taught at a very, very young age that people with penises should be tough and people with vulvas should be gentle, while simultaneously being taught the confusing notion that you can be whatever you want to be. Unless, of course, you decide to be something that goes outside cultural expectations. My son is a great example. I have 6-year-old twins. One is a boy and one is a girl. At least they seem to be happy with those gender assignations right now. My husband was having his first art show in a gallery, and we were getting ready for the soiree. My son watched as his mother and 2 older sisters went from leggings and t-shirts to makeup and glitter and flowing fabrics. The very silhouette of our attire changed as we switched to dresses, and he felt left out. He also wanted to express how proud he was of his father's accomplishments by dressing up, but didn't understand how one can dress up without a dress. He too wanted sparkle and shine and clothing that said, "I am wearing my special outfit to celebrate." So my son went to his father's art gallery with a velvet sea green tank with sequin straps and a matching tulle skirt. He twirled and pranced and blushed when given compliments. He had a lovely time. However, my 6-year-old son will be the first to tell you that he is a boy. He also happens to like many stereotypical boy things, like Pokemon and Minecraft, and Legos and cars. He also loves spinning so fast in a dress that it lifts off the ground. All of these things are simultaneously true about my son. And I think if most of us explored ourselves, we would find how complicated we really are. My favorite author, Ursula K. Le Guin, may she rest in peace, said, "Most men and women have both men and women inside them, lots of them, and are capable of being much more than they're told they're capable of being." Let's talk about pronouns. I actually have an entire presentation dedicated just to pronouns. It's a big topic, but you can't talk about gender identity without explaining pronouns. So here's the short version. First of all, there is a long history of neutral pronouns and using plural pronouns for the singular and vice versa. So this is for those of you who, like me, were English majors and have trouble using they for an individual. In addition, the 566 tribal communities of the United States all have at least one person that consider themselves to be two-spirit. In many of those cultures, a two-spirited person tends to be a storyteller and a bridge builder between men and women. Gender fluidity is not new, but it's been forgotten, and we are relearning what it is to live in a non-binary world. There are many alternatives that exist for he, she pronouns, like she and z, and of course, they, which is very popular in our area. The way this is navigated is by being proactive. You state what your pronouns are first, and this tells the other person that A, you are aware that pronouns are an important aspect of gender identity, B, that you are comfortable with people not having cisgender pronouns, and C, that you're respectful. If you've never done this before, it can feel weird. That's okay. You will probably make mistakes. That's okay too. The trying is more important than pretending pronouns don't matter. So let's do a little thought experiment. Think to yourself what your pronouns are. For me, that is she. I am Ms. Carina Gonzalez. I am a woman. Now call yourself a different gendered pronoun in your head. For most people, including me, this is very weird and uncomfortable. I'm not a man. I am not a he. I am not Mr. Gonzalez. It feels weird even saying that out loud. To call me such is jarring and disrespectful because pronouns really matter. So now imagine that you were forced to use an uncomfortable pronoun for the rest of your life. Every time someone sees you, they call you the wrong pronoun. They assume something you're not, and are very offended when you don't act the part they've assigned to you. This is the slightest of tastes of what it is to be transgender. The term transgender or trans has become an umbrella term for many identities. Each identity is a little different, but all are extremely personal. Only you can decide how best to define yourself. Just as we all won't agree what it means to be a woman or what it means to be a man. Personally, I think it's in the eyebrows. But it can be just as indefinite to guarantee what is or is not a drag queen, or what is the difference between genderqueer and bigender. It's personal. Since we still have a lot of material to go through, we're going to focus on the difference between someone who is transsexual and transgender, since that seems to be a real sticking point for a lot of people. We've discussed the difference between sex and gender, the former being what's in your pants and the latter being what's in your head and your heart. Both transgendered and transsexual individuals were born into bodies that do not match their gender identities. This has nothing to do with who they are or are not sexually attracted to. It's all about identity. Self-perception of gender identity happens in people as young as 2 years old. Little kids know if they're little boys or little girls, and they tend to know quite young if how they see themselves doesn't match how everyone else sees them. It's invasion of the body snatchers. When a person changes their gender expression to match their gender identity, they are considered to be transitioning. They are in the process of correcting a misconception that was made about them at birth. People who consider themselves to be transsexual have decided to undergo procedures to make their genitals and secondary sex characteristics match their gender identity. The decision to undergo gender-affirming surgery is extremely personal, not required, and also, frankly, none of anyone's business. It is not okay to ask a trans person if they have had surgery. It would be like asking a man if they've been circumcised or how large a woman's labia are. If you know someone really well, then by all means, you can have those conversations. But it's a very private matter that is only discussed with someone you trust. Now let's talk about homophobia. Unfortunately, there is a lot of hate directed at people who are not cisgender or heterosexual. Homophobia is when someone encompasses a range of negative attitudes and feelings toward homosexuality, or people who are identified or perceived as being lesbian, gay, bisexual, or transgender, also known as LGBT. It has been defined as contempt, prejudice, aversion, hatred, or antipathy. That counts too. It can be based on irrational fear and ignorance, and is also related to religious beliefs. However, up to 11% of young people are same-sex attracted or unsure about it. That means at a school of 1,000 kids, 110 will be experiencing feelings of same-sex attraction. And unfortunately, someone who has been the target of homophobia is up to 6 times more likely to complete suicide than their straight friends. Some homophobia is direct, like this flyer, designed by the group Fascist Solutions. They implore LGBT folk to embrace their suicide rates and continue killing themselves. 30% of suicides are LGBT related. 34% of trans people attempt suicide. And over 40% of bisexual people consider suicide. If you're Black, those numbers go up significantly. But much of homophobia is subtle and just as deadly. Saying that something you dislike is so gay, or referring to people as faggots, dykes, or homos is homophobic language. Refusing to sit next to someone who is perceived to be LGBT is homophobic behavior. Neither gender identity nor sexual orientation are contagious. You can't catch gay. There is plenty we can do as people, library workers, and institutions to battle homophobia and heterosexism. So before we discuss what libraries can do, I would be remiss not to mention intersectionality. Coined by Kimberly Williams Crenshaw in 1989, intersectionality is the interconnected nature of social categorizations such as race, class, and gender, creating overlapping and independent systems of discrimination or disadvantage. You can be gay and Black, transgender and old, lesbian and a non-English speaker, poor and genderqueer. People are so rarely one thing. And whenever we talk about what we can do to make a difference, we have to acknowledge all of the differences that exist and coexist. I'm LGBTQ and a woman of color and married to a white cisgender straight man. It's easy to look at me and my life and make assumptions, but you might be wrong. I'm also on the autistic spectrum and a Black belt and disabled and vertically challenged and overweight and nearsighted. That last sentence was tongue in cheek, but I hope you get the idea that even though we're focusing on gender and sexuality, those attributes don't exist in a bubble, but rather a rainbow of bubbles. Now that you've had an overview of the many identities which make up the LGBT family, I wanted to show you the many different flags which celebrate these identities. So we have asexual, bisexual, genderqueer, intersex, lesbian, non-binary, pansexual, Philly pride, which is different from pride progress, straight allies, transgender, and two-spirit. The Philly pride flag is intersectional because it includes race. So you can see by the skin colors, there's a brown and there's a black line. And pride progress, which is right next to it, includes race and trans rights. So if you'll see, that triangle is actually a combination of sort of the Philly pride flag, the gay flag, and the transgender flag, all sort of put together with an arrow showing progress, forward motion. My picture at the beginning and end of this presentation is actually surrounded by the progressive pride flag because it's my personal favorite. So how do we make our libraries more welcome to LGBTQIA plus folks? In 2017, a research survey by Drake, the link to which I included in the resources, addressed what accommodations libraries needed to make for transgender individuals to feel safe, what areas had the greatest unmet information needs, and why trans people did not use the libraries as an information resource at all. Some of the accommodations the author mentions included current transgender literature, or the lack thereof, gender identity and expression as part of their institution's non-discrimination policy, and gender-neutral restrooms. Unmet information needs included transgender health, legal and political advocacy information, some reasons for overall low level of library satisfaction were either not enough applicable resources or out-of-date resources. Therefore, respondents did not consider libraries reliable sources of information. Discomfort at interacting with library staff also made the list. That's a lot. It includes our policies, collections, staff trainings, signage, and construction. But there are some small things we can do to take steps in the right direction. So let's start with the collection. This word cloud shows the reasons why books are challenged in our country. According to ALA, diverse books, especially those with LGBT content, with an emphasis on the T, so especially trans content, are among the most frequently challenged books. However, representation matters. And it's important for all people in a community to find themselves reflected in the collection, as well as providing windows for those outside of the LGBTQ population to look in and understand what their world looks like. A truly great library contains something in it to offend everyone, says Joe Godwin. Increasing the diversity of our collections is one step, but how we market those collections is important as well. How many times have we had patrons ask if we had anything a little boy would want to read, or something girly for their daughter? We create Valentine's Day displays, and every single book features a heterosexual and probably white cisgender couple. Our toy areas are inadvertently gender defined, with a kitchen for the girls and trucks for the boys. We subconsciously decorate our computer areas masculine and our romance sections feminine. Male is blue, female is pink, and we are doing a disservice to our patrons by not acknowledging the complexity of their identities. We are large, we contain multitudes, and how we present our collections should be gender inclusive as well. We can also use our technology to affirm the gender identity of our patrons. Here's a snapshot of our ILS at Piscataway, which has a built-in option to use someone's preferred name. So you might want to check your ILS and see if it has that option too. This is a quick and simple way to keep someone's current information while honoring and affirming their wishes. And of course, there's bathrooms. First, let's talk about why bathrooms are important. In short, when we have restrooms that are segregated according to gender, some patrons may feel uncomfortable using them because other people may not perceive that they're allowed to use that restroom. This can make using the bathroom very stressful and even dangerous. According to the most recent National Transgender Discrimination Survey report, 63% of respondents had experienced a serious act of discrimination in their lifetime. And according to a 2013 Williams Institute report, roughly 70% of trans people have reported being denied entrance, assaulted, or harassed while trying to use a restroom. And those numbers are pretty old at this point. It's actually gotten worse. Yet there has never been a verifiable reported instance of a trans person harassing a cisgender person, nor have there been any confirmed reports of male predators pretending to be transgender to gain access to women's spaces and commit crimes against them. So the fact is, gendered bathrooms can cause harm, yet gender-neutral bathrooms don't. Unfortunately, even if you want to have a gender-neutral bathroom, that's not always a possibility. Bathrooms are expensive. Communities push back. Buildings have codes, and I have failed to find any construction grants that assist in bathroom conversions. However, there are some things you can do. There is a great brochure that I have included in the resources at the end of this presentation, packed full of ideas like converting single stall bathrooms, creating welcoming signage, or outright providing lists of local gender neutral bathroom options for people if your bathroom doesn't quite give them what they need. So now that I've given you a lot of information on the intersection of libraries and gender and sexuality, I will leave you with a few thought-provoking questions. You are not meant to answer these questions today, but rather recognize that these questions exist and are worth pondering, and how big this topic really is. How do search algorithms, metadata standards, and user interfaces challenge or reinforce white supremacy, heteronormative patriarchy, and ableism? How do our catalogs, databases, finding aids, and collections disguise the traces of oppression, even while perpetuating the violence visited upon the oppressed? How do we talk about the absence of voices, either in the historical record or from our present day communities, that haunts the architecture and design of our systems? How have technologies been used to selectively forget pasts to perpetuate certain futures? How are technologies used to unearth the forgotten? How do we address the absent presence of laboring bodies behind our technologies, especially those bodies whose labor is devalued and poorly remunerated? What kind of digital cultural memory and community-based projects are critical right now? How do we begin to redress the inequities that library and information technologies perpetuate, where the default user is most often white and able-bodied, and whose architects, designers, and managers are most often white cis men? So what I've given you today is just the tip of the gender studies iceberg. I hope I have piqued your interest and maybe inspired a call to action. Here are the promised resources, including a highly recommended TED Talk by two-spirited person, Nicholas Metcalf, which I put at the top for you. And here's my information again. Please don't hesitate to contact me with questions, and enjoy the rainbow.
Thank you, Carina. I want to say to those of you who are here right now and have been to some of our skill sharing conversations in the past, I know that typically we don't do quite such a presentation. We do a lot more chatting, which we still have plenty of time to do. But just because this is such a, it's such an important topic, I wanted to make sure, and I think Carina wanted to make sure that, you know, we're getting it right. And so now we have a lot of food for thought. But we still have close to 30 minutes. We have 25 minutes left for chat and conversation. And what all did you come prepared to share or ask or talk about? Or maybe if you didn't come with something, maybe Carina's presentation brought something up that you'd like to talk about. So feel free to unmute or put your camera on if you want, and let's hear what everybody has to say.
I know it's a lot.
It is. Anything? Anything steps you guys have taken in your libraries? Or problems you've run into? Very quiet group today. Or does if anybody wants to put anything in the chat, maybe if you don't feel, oh, go ahead, Jenna. You can unmute if you're able, or you can.
Yes, just give me a second because I wasn't
Sure.
prepared. Okay.
Absolutely.
So I'm sure we've all heard of the controversy around the book Gender Queer, the graphic novel for teens, and how it's pornographic and whatever. So I made a big gay display, which it has no signage or anything. It's just these are some queer books. I put a rainbow. It's a rainbow like pencil holder and some note paper. And I've been getting some really great notes from the teens. I've been saving them. So I don't know. I'm gonna hold this up. I'm gonna read it anyway. It says, "Gay is a compliment, not offensive." So that's from a teen. Then I got this one that it's a smiley face and says "gay." Oh, look, you can see how bad my nails are. Why am I doing this? And then I got this one that says, "Hello, I am lesbian." So I put these in my monthly report so that the board could read them, because we don't know when they're going to get to us to challenge those books, and I want the board to know that it's so important. And the teens are noticing, the teens need it, and so that's what I wanted to share. So.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that, Jenna.
Yeah, and when someone decides to share that with you, either anonymously or not, it's a big deal. I'm still in contact with most of the students who came out to me when I was a high school librarian. And it's such a gift that they gave me, that they shared that with me. And I'm so glad that they felt safe enough to do that. We have something in the chat.
Yeah, and I'll read it out because for the recording. So it says, "I'm the teen services librarian and I have volunteers fill out a getting to know you form so that they can identify themselves and their gender identity, but I do it in a way that I can keep their confidences and they can update at any time. I have had a few teens change their forms. It also lets me know who I can use what names and pronouns with, including teachers and family members." That is a great idea, Rachel.
I love that.
That's a great idea. Thank you for sharing that.
Could you maybe share that with Darby so we can all see it? Because I would love to see that form. That sounds super helpful.
Yeah, Rachel, if you don't mind, I will email it out when I email out the follow-up with Carina's slides, if you're comfortable with it, if you want to send it to me.
Yeah, sure.
We'll
read the next one.
Since it came up in the table of contents slide, just wanted to share that the ungendered X in certain ethnic names like Latinx, etc., do not apply. From personal experience, I see a lot of Phil-Am people using Philippine X when in actuality the term Filipino is actually ungendered to begin with, since our language doesn't have gendered pronouns. And as such, native Filipinos may not like the use of the X. All this is to say, take the ungendered X's by case. Yeah, that is like almost its whole own conversation and presentation, right? That's one that I myself always struggle with because I'm not a language expert, and I am a very, very white lady. So I always see like the term Latinx in places, and I never know whether or not that's an assumption people are making that they shouldn't make, or I think that, so thank you for pointing that out. I did not know that about Filipinos, so that's really good to know. I wonder if that's the case in other languages as well. I'm not as familiar with too many world languages to know.
Okay, so Tagalog, which is I guess what you're talking about, is an ungendered language. That's cool to know. But yeah, most of the Romance languages are gendered, and Spanish. I actually went to a talk about this, about Latinx, and the whole controversy behind it, because Spanish is a gendered language and we're sort of stuck with it that way. You know, like this computer is female, this table is female, according to the Spanish language. And Latinx is something that was created by non-Spanish speakers, because you can't really say Latinx in Spanish. Well, it doesn't really roll. We would say, we would say Latino for inclusive, but if you want to avoid the gendering, you would just say Latin, which works as well. So for some people who are Spanish speakers, they're trying to push back against that X, especially since X also symbolically is a removing symbol. It's a cross out. It's we're going to remove instead of include and add. And instead of just going with the Latin. But even then it gets complicated, because there's a difference between, Latino, Latin, and Hispanic, and Caribbean, and South American, and all the places that Spain has conquered and forced people to learn the language. Yes, pushback against folks versus folks, which is already gender neutral as it is. Exactly. Yeah, like I said, I have a whole presentation just on pronouns and how people call themselves and how to pronounce all the different types. But I've used both folks and folks. I don't like either of them. I just don't like the way it sounds in my mouth. I don't like folks. I like y'all, even though I'm not from the South. It just works better for me. And that's sort of the takeaway. Do what works for you. Melissa says, I'm trying to relearn Spanish and was wondering how languages that are gendered will change over time. I'd love a time ship to see that one. I don't have an answer for you there. I mean, it's even down to our naming, like in right. Spanish culture, because when I was choosing the names for my own children, I wanted to make sure that they were names that you could say easily in Spanish so that my relatives could say their names. And that meant all the girls ended in A's and the boys didn't, because that's the way the language goes. So it's interesting. Earthlings. Rachel calls their teens earthlings. I love it. My daughter and her best friend are they define as non-binary, so I call them my little NBs. So whenever I would need a collective of them, like NBs, time for dinner. They like it.
Because we have about 15 minutes left, I'm actually going to end the recording here. That way, in case anyone has anything they might want to talk about or ask about that you'd prefer we not record, just because I know this can be, some of these topics can be personal. I'm going to end the recording now. So if you're watching the recording, thanks for coming. And that way